Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4, Episode 10, Old Friends, New Planets. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Lower Decks, so I have to start with the spoiler warning for Star Trek Lower Decks up to the Season 4 finale. If you have not perhaps had a chance to view this particular episode, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, yeah, I like this episode. This was a pretty powerful finale. I'm not sure I would say this is amongst my favorite episodes of Lower Decks because there's a few issues I had with this episode. In fact, in retrospect, I kind of want to elevate last week's episode, change my rating from an 8 to a 9. I actually think that episode was actually a bit better than this one. But anywho, so yeah, I think last week I was just tripped up over the canon and the optics of it. In fact, I deduced through my research that the time that Mariner was at the Academy, she was probably in her first year where she knew Nick Licardo, and it was about 13 years ago, and that is confirmed in this episode. So, yes, way to go me. Anyway, so yeah, let's start with the flashback to the Academy. I like this. I thought this was a really cool scene. I like how they got Will Wheaton to voice Wesley Crusher, even though he only had a few lines. And I could tell that Will Wheaton, because he's much older now, I could tell he was putting on trying to put on a almost Morty like squeaky teenager voice, like, "Come on, man, what?" and so I thought that was actually kind of funny. And they actually did get the actress who played Cedo, original actress who played Cedo, that's quite impressive. So yes, and it was a cool scene too that really showed Mariner being super young and really impressionable and looking up to Nova Squadron, admiring him, because that was implied in the episode The First Duty that everyone admired Nova Squadron like they were the bee's knees back in the day. So I think that was cool to see. My one little nitpick about this episode this scene is that they didn't have Cadet Hager. They said, they even had Josh, the guy we never actually saw in First Duty, because he died before that episode took place, and they were showing him and his trepidations on doing this stunt, but they didn't have Cadet Hager. She was part of the Nova Squad as well. Why didn't they have her? You can't say that maybe she joined after the incident, but no, she wouldn't have been on trial if she joined after. She was a part of it. If you watch First Duty, she was part of Nova Squadron, and she was part of the failed stunt. So, and you don't even have to have her have a line. Henceforth, you don't need henceforth. But anyway, henceforth, though thou. Anyway, she don't need to have a voice actor for her. All you need to do is animate her. And maybe that was the original intention. Maybe this was. So I don't blame the writers. I blame the director, the animators. And the director of the episode is mainly involved in animating, because maybe they saw the script and saw those 4 speaking roles and okay, these are the only people we need to animate. You're wrong! You missed Cadet Hager! You need to animate her, even if she doesn't have any lines, because she was a part of Nova Squadron. And it felt the whole time. In fact, I was watching this scene. I was like, where the hell is Hager? And then when they're like, oh, look who it is. I'm like, oh, is it Cadet Hager? No, it's Mariner. I'm like, okay, well, where's Hager? Anyway. I'll put a picture up on the screen if you don't know who I'm talking about. And yeah, that person. Her. Anyway, so that, as I said, that's just a minor little nitpick. When we get into my other sort of more substance complaint about this scene is I really feel like I love it, but I feel like it should have had more relevance to the episode. Like, it was great seeing Sito again, but in retrospect, the fact that they don't really mention her again, or they do mention her briefly about how she died, but they don't really, I don't know, to me, they don't make this scene relevant enough, and therefore it comes off as kind of a sort of member berry, or a sort of Easter egg, or just look at this, remember that episode? Which I'm not saying it is entirely, but it is a little bit, in my humble opinion, because I think they should have made it more relevant. It seems like kind of an indulgence to show this flashback rather than setting the scene because it doesn't really come into play for the rest of the episode. You may say, it establishes the kind of relationship that Mariner and Nick Locarno had, but that doesn't even take that much relevance in this episode, in my humble, that they just immediately, Mariner portrays him and they're chasing after each other. So this whole thing seems kind of, I know that he does like bring it up, and he has some expectation that she would join him, but part of that was also due to him saying that he had been following her career and saw that she, constantly fought being promoted, and so thought that she would be perfect for his little band. So in retrospect, the flashback scene's kind of unnecessary, which I wanted it to be more necessary. I wish they found more ways to make it relevant to the rest of the episode, personally, because I liked it so much. Anyway, regarding Nick Locarno's master plan, I did kind of like it, and I think it is a very poignant and relevant villain to have for Lower Decks, which is a show specifically focused on the minor crew members who don't have a major role. And it's interesting that he would focus on those who feel left out and disregarded from, or not sort of, they feel like they're not getting the due that they deserve. I do like that the Klingon character from Wage is not one of those people who joined with Nick Locarno. That he specifically wasn't, because he is actually better than that. So it's mainly focused on people who are really petty. Although we didn't see what happened to him, by the way, because last week's episode he killed the Klingon captain, and ripped him apart, and I am the captain now. Yeah, I don't know. So is he captain? Because that's part of Klingon culture, though. If you kill the captain, you become the captain. So I don't know. I have a feeling that we'll see this character again, and if we don't, I'll be hugely disappointed. But speaking of Wage Douche, it is kind of reminiscent of that, because it focuses, as I said, it gets the theme of Lower Decks, where it focuses on the characters who are... Wage Douche showed us the lower deckers of other alien ships, just the Klingons and the Vulcans, where here we get the lower deckers on many cultures, and we got those throughout these scenes that we've seen throughout the season, which I thought was actually a really great way to build up to the storyline, where they would just take a time to show these scenes, and I think it does help flesh out the story and make it more impactful. So that aspect of that I like that he played off of the, these people feeling like they're not getting their due the way they should. And I think that's very believable in terms of Ferengi and Romulans specifically, that they feel like they could outdo their superiors. And I like how specifically they did not choose any Federation Starfleet officers. In fact, he tried to, get Mariner to join him, and that failed. Because Starfleet's actually better than that, and I think that was a specific point of this episode, so it goes perfectly well with Roddenberry's vision for Star Trek. So, on board with that. Although I do find it, why were the Bynars? Did they feel slighted by their superiors? We didn't even know that they were, subordinates to the superiors because we didn't understand a goddamn word they were saying. I'm sorry. Some people thought it was cool, that scene when the Bynars, we just got a scene of Bynars going, and we could see that they were upset over something, but we had no fucking idea. I think that scene should have had subtitles. And I think when they appeared in this episode, it should have had subtitles. I think they could have done something hilarious with these subtitles, in fact. But, in fact, you know what? Bynars did speak English, or Starfleet Standard, or whatever you want to call it, in the episode 11001001. So, I mean, when they're by themselves, it makes sense they wouldn't. But when they were with Nick Locarno in this episode, they should have. They could. It's not like they can't communicate in English, because you would have said no, like they do that thing where one talks and the other talks. Like, they should have done that. So I'm bit disappointed in how they mishandled the Bynars. But anyway, because I genuinely wanted to know what their deal was, and I thought it was kind of funny when Mariner went on the bridge. Like, "Hi, Bynars." It's kind of funny. Reminding you again, my research came up that Mariner had dated Bynars before. Anyway, or I don't know, would she date one or two of them? It seems like they would come as a pair. But anyway. Anyway, that's an interesting question that Sharon needs to answer. Anyway, so the joke that I loved and I was laughing hilariously at was when the on the Cerritos, they were watching the message from Nick Locarno. And the whole time Rutherford was just like, "That looks just like Tom Paris." And Boimler's like, "I'm sorry, I don't see it." And then like all this other stuff, serious, like plot heavy, like suspenseful stuff happens, and we just cut back to Rutherford. He's like, "No, seriously, he has like the same face as Tom Paris." Boimler's like, "I'm sorry, I'm just not getting it." I was laughing hysterically at that. Of course, this, the end joke, obviously, that both characters were played by the same actor. And I love how they pointed that out. I absolutely love how they pointed that out. They absolutely needed to. Now, then we had, of course, we have Mariner going, like, "This guy sucks." Like, I wasn't expecting that. I was thinking that she would play along with him a bit more and trying to be like, "Oh, yeah, sure, I'm totally on your side." But I thought it was hilarious how she was just like, "This guy sucks," and just freaks out and takes the Genesis device. And it's interesting, I didn't address this in the other episode that this appeared in, but it's interesting they bring back the Genesis device. I always wondered whatever happened to that technology. But anyway, seems like they perfected it too. But anywho, that so that was hilarious. But then we get a scene of Freeman defying orders, which I liked. Like, it reminded me of Star Trek 3-ish. The whole it's kind of a cliche, but I think like if any Star Trek show, I'm willing to accept it in its Lower Decks. And also the cliche of where she goes in the comms and says, "Who wants to join me? This is illegal. It's going to definitely result in a court-martial," which as a viewer we know it's not going to. But she's warning that it will. And everyone on the bridge is like, "Yes, we're with you." And then all decks report in and say, "Yes, we're with you." Now, my first reaction to this is to be fine with it. I've complained about this in other shows like Deep Space Nine I'm thinking of the Circle trilogy and then Voyager and the 37s or whatever, when they were like, oh, the Circle trilogy, Sisko's like, I wouldn't blame anyone for not wanting to join, but of course everyone joins. And the 37s on Voyager, they were like, oh, anyone who wants to stay on this peaceful planet with humans can stay, and nobody wants to stay. And I hated both of those because surely there would be a couple people who would be like, no, fuck this. I pass. In fact, I praised Battlestar Galactica in their final 2 episodes because they went on a dangerous mission. Like, we're asking for volunteers, not everyone has to go. And I praised it for them actually having the balls to have a lot of people not go, to be like, no, I don't want to go. This is too dangerous. But with Lower Decks, it's kind of it is a somewhat serious show. I do take it somewhat seriously, but it's also silly at the same time. So I'm more willing to be like, yeah, this is just a silly show, so that's fine. They want to use that trope. But when I thought about this in retrospect, I feel like this was a missed opportunity to make a joke about what I would have done is had like one ensign on one deck being like, no, I don't want to go, this is dumb, and just being a standout and being like, okay, whatever, Bob, if you don't want to go, you don't have to, there you go. Maybe they could have had it be that conspiracy theory guy and be like, oh, I don't want to go because this is, and come up with some crazy conspiracy theory, and everyone rolls their eyes like, okay, fine, whatever, give him a shuttlecraft and he can fuck off. I think it was a missed opportunity to make fun of that trope, personally, but otherwise I don't have an issue with it. But what I do have a major issue is what we get next with the Tendi storyline. And I mentioned this before in the episode, and it seems like we're going hard out. In fact, they made it the cliffhanger of the season, which I'm not okay with. This is part of what dents this episode for me. And I talked about this in the episode we got with Tendi and the Orions, and how I didn't really care for that episode, and I didn't really like that they're now kind of softly retconning, because as I said, it's not a true retcon because they never specifically stated that Tendi was not, a Orion pirate princess or whatever, but I feel like it was strongly implied that she wasn't in the first couple seasons, and now they're kind of going against that. It doesn't defy canon, just to be clear. I know that. Just like Bashir's genetically enhanced, and well, I think that actually did in a bit, but this doesn't. But I think it defies the spirit of the character from the earlier seasons, and so I don't like in that regard. So when they go to this planet and they go to Orion, and her sister's like, you have to become princess or whatever. And I'll get to the actual fight or whatever next. I want to talk just about this in general. And it just didn't sit right with me, and I didn't like it. And so I was analyzing, thinking about it after I watched the episode, why this whole storyline with Tendi bringing an Orion pirate princess, why this doesn't sit right with me. And I came to the realization it's because I feel like the character of Tendi in the first 2 seasons was meant to defy the fact that Star Trek always stereotypes as aliens. That all Klingons are warriors, all Vulcans are logical, all Romulans are deceptive, all Cardassians are assholes, all Bajorans are religious. Well, let Roe defy that. But anyway, yeah, so that's, and it seems like they were making a statement with Tendi that and there was a reason she would get offended whenever anyone called her an Orion pirate, because that's an ugly stereotype, and not all Orions are pirates, which would make sense. You have an entire society of assuming millions, perhaps billions of people, not all of them would be pirates. And there must be some engineers, some counselors, some chefs. Like, there have to be different professions and different cultures rather than an entire planet or several planets of just pirates. And so it would make sense that we'd have someone who was scientifically minded and had nothing to do with pirates, and so she would get offended if you say she was a pirate. Now, and I think around season 3, they revealed that she did have some pirating skills, or season 2, sorry, which is fine, but in season 3, it was revealed that she specifically comes from a family of pirates. And now they're going even harder into that she's this pirate princess or whatever, who everyone bows to. And I'm starting to, I just realized why that bothers me so much, because it is basically going against the bold statement of you shouldn't stereotype people to you should stereotype people to. It's like saying, yeah, sure, I'm not going to throw out a contemporary example, but you're probably thinking of some in your head because I could. And to me, it's equivalent of that, saying all blank are like blank, which is a terrible thing to message to put out there. And I think that's why this sits so poorly with me and so bad with me, because it seems like they are feeding into stereotypes and not just the sort of, you might think I'm being too sensitive or whatever, but not just on the sort of political, social commentary side, but also on the simply creative side, that this is creatively bankrupt, that it's doing something cliche and easy rather than taking the harder route. And it's feeding into negative stereotypes of people. And I think that's why this is sitting hard with me. And I don't think I'm ever going to look past this. And it does look like, because they made it the big cliffhanger of the season, it does look like they are going to go deeper into the storyline, digging their grave even deeper into the next season. And I don't think I'm never going to be able to look past it. I'm never going to be okay with this. In fact, with this realization of why exactly this is was sitting wrong with me the whole time, makes me even more disturbed when I think about what they're actually doing and how on many levels I have an issue with this. And so that is my biggest issue with this episode. Even though, like, previous episodes they played into it last week. Last week it was just a throwaway line. I'm more able to resist it. This week they made it a major plot point, and plus the big cliffhanger of the episode. So I'm not able to overlook it. And also, I also had an issue with the fight with Megumilau, which at first I thought was hilarious, and I knew that it was obvious they were going to do this, but it didn't make it any less funny. Like when they had this huge, gigantic, like, they even pointed out that's like 2 Shaqs or whatever, this like huge muscular woman who could easily kick anyone's ass, and they showed who should the opponent be, and they showed like Shax and Ransom and K-Shine all going ready to fight. I knew there was no way she was going to pick one of them that would be someone you least expect. I didn't even expect Megumilau, though. When she said Megumilau, he was like, what? I was like, that was hilarious. But ultimately, I don't like the scene, and I don't think it worked, because I think the point of the scene is, you think Megumilau's going to get his ass kicked, and so the point has to be he wins. But when he loses, even though the way he lost was a bit silly, because he, Tindy was banking on him, that what's-her-face woman being allergic to him, but that backfired on her. I think that ruins the joke. Personally, I think the joke only works if Megumilau wins. The fact that even though Megumilau lost through something silly because she fell on top of him, ruins the entire joke, in my humble opinion. That's just me. If other people see it differently, which I'm sure a lot of people will, I have no issue with that. You're welcome to your opinion. That is just my personal reaction. That was just my personal take on this joke. I don't think it works this way. Anyway, so then we get back to the Mariner running from Locarno and his thugs, and I like how she was trying to sow discontent between them by, pointing like, oh, we're all equals, and when he gives an order, it's like, oh, he's your equal, huh? And it's interesting because there's the Genesis device, and I like the sort of gag of her constantly talking to the Genesis device. I thought that was kind of cool. And then they turned it into a whole Star Trek II thing where they even had music very similar to Star Trek II and scenes reminiscent of Star Trek II. She goes into a storm, which is very similar to the Matario Nebula scene. They even, the music was similar, the visuals were similar. That was cool. I actually like this, and I will forgive Lower Decks for, paying this such obvious homage to Star Trek II a lot more than I would a show like Picard. Because, as I said, I don't take Lower Decks entirely seriously because I know there's an element of silliness to it, even though there is elements I do take, that are emotional, that are exciting. So there's elements of it I obviously do take seriously, but there's still that level of silliness to it, which is why it's able to get away with some things that Picard, which is supposed to be a totally serious show, does not get away with, in my opinion. Like the whole joke with the punk from Star Trek IV. I would have thought it was fine in Lower Decks, but in Picard it's out of place and stupid. And I think same thing with Picard Season 3. It's cringy the way they obviously played too obvious homage and too reliant on member berries, whereas Lower Decks does it. I'm more willing to go with it, but that is just me again. Maybe some people react differently. I don't know. But anyway, so I actually thought it was kind of cool the homages they did to Star Trek 2. And I thought they were going to emulate Spock's death, but in retrospect, that's already been done several times in Nemesis and Star Trek Into Darkness, so they don't really need to do that again. But, and plus, don't do another death fake out with the main character, please. Anyway, that was cool. I like how Locarno thought he was going to turn off with the Ferengi. He said insert 2 slips of gold first platinum, and he was like, God damn it. And it does seem like, the way she was relating to these Ferengis and Romulans when Mariner was trying to talk them down, it was kind of callbacks to their episodes and sort of playing into their culture a bit, which, it was interesting. It was definitely interesting, and I like, Mariner showing up, Captain Freeman showing up in the captain's yacht, and they make a joke about how they never see the captain's yacht. It's because, and the show of Next Generation, they always, people who read the technical manuals or some of the supplemental material always heard about this captain's yacht, which, by the way, the technical manual was written by the, people who were directly involved with the show, and so it was kind of canon, by the way. It's not just some made-up novel bullshit. And in fact, we did get to see the captain's yacht finally in Insurrection, but never throughout the entire run of TNG. So this was a nice little end joke when they said, "Oh, we never actually, I never actually saw this." And they made Boimler the acting captain. I don't know. There's people that outrank him. Even on the bridge, there was that Trill helmsman. I'm sure she outranks him. So that, and Billups and all them, I don't think he went on the mission with them. What about Miggy, who he was putting in the fridge, called his Mima? But anyway, but I did think that was a cool moment for Boimler, and I like how, and I hope they actually touch on this more and play on this more. And so I did like that, even though but it's not anywhere near as bad as making Tilly the first officer, though. So that's fine. But yeah, that was a cool scene, and then she comes in, saves Mariner, and everything is well. Oh yeah, I also got to bring up the whole thing with Rutherford and Livik. I did think it was funny to see the return of Livik and how they were griping at each other, and T'Lyn's like, I know how to resolve this situation, and like, oh, are you talking about a Vulcan mind melt? Which is actually what I was thinking too. But instead, next thing we see is them both dressed up as Mark Twain going, oh, I do declare. Get a nice callback to the earlier episode, the in-joke with Mark Twain. I thought that was kind of funny. Although, when I think about it, this is kind of an aside that doesn't really have anything to do with anything. I think it's kind of this episode trying to touch back on all the earlier episodes of the season. So I did think it was kind of a funny gag, but ultimately, didn't really need to be there, but that's okay. When she was talking to Admiral, and they mentioned this the sensors guy again, but anyway, when he mentioned there's something about her lieutenant, and I thought she was talking about Mariner, that she was going to promote Mariner to even full lieutenant, which I actually thought would have been a nice way. And in fact, if Mariner fully accepted it and said thank you rather than freaking out over it, I thought that would have been a really nice character for her. But instead, she was talking about Tendi with that storyline I hate. So I was like, oh god. But anyway, I did like the overall character story for Mariner. I think it really worked this season. When I first saw the Ferengi episode where she was being suicidal or violent, I thought that this was a regression for her character and a repetitive storyline that we sort of already moved beyond this. But I think it was handled way better in last episode. But also, watching Jessie Ginger's review of last week's episode where she talked about how part of that storyline with her, trying to get demoted, that was resolved with her talk with the Ransom, but the underlining problems of why she didn't feel right for being promoted was still there. So even though she wasn't going to try to purposely get demoted anymore, she was still having underlining issues with the fact that she was promoted, which they explained finally why that is in last week's episode, which the more I think about it, the more I like it, especially when it gets into the trauma of the Dominion War. And so it manifested itself, even though she stopped trying to get demoted, it manifested itself in different ways, which resulted in the risky behavior, which, again, she wasn't consciously trying to kill herself or hurt herself. She was just acting up. And it was just that underlining subliminal issues, trauma that she had manifesting itself. And so once it was explained to me that way, I'm like, oh, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. So in retrospect, it kind of justifies that whole storyline in the Ferengi episode. Although, as I said last week, they weren't consistent with that, but I'll let it slide for now. But anyway, and so I think this was a great resolution to that, and how being confronted with Locarno and seeing the dangers of what happens when you let those negative sides of you get the better of you and control you. And as you know, her purposely sticking up for Starfleet and how awesome it was made her realize that she didn't, that made her sort of overcome those feelings. And so I thought it was a great character resolution for this character. I think T'Len should have appeared more in this episode, although she did have a couple funny lines. Like I like how when, Freeman was asking for volunteers to go to defy orders, her response was, I believe the only appropriate response in this situation is Cerritos Strong. Like, that was a great moment. I love that. But, and of course, at the end of the episode, she gets a call from their former captain, which towards the beginning of the season, she was desperate to get back to. And then she purposely doesn't even take the call and like, screw that. I want to stay here. Like, that was cool. And, of course, Mike McMahan has mentioned that she will feature even more prominently in Season 5, so I'm really looking forward to that. So, yeah, I already talked about the cliffhanger and how I don't like it, so I don't need to reinsert that here. But other than that, I did like the ending of this episode, and I like the overall character arc for Mariner for the entire season. So my rating for Old Friends, New Planets, out of 10, I'm going to give this a 9. And as I said, I also given last week's episode upgrading that to a 9 as well. So I think these are both strong episodes. Doesn't get a 10 because of the Tendi stuff, being perfectly frank. Other than the Tendi stuff, I thought this was a really strong episode. The few other nitpicks I had, but still, I thought it was a great resolution, great to the season as a whole, and a very exciting, very engaging episode. Good episode of Lower Decks. So that is it for my review of the season 4 finale of Lower Decks, but not at all my end of my coverage of Season 4 of Lower Decks, because coming up this Monday night, 9 p.m. East Coast time, 6 p.m. West Coast time in the U.S., I will be doing a live discussion here on Enchantment of Eternity with my sister Alyssa, and we're going to break down and discuss Season 4 of Lower Decks as a whole, so you can join us live in the chat for that discussion or watch us afterwards in the archives. And also, next Thursday, I will be back to do my overall review of Season 4 of Lower Decks. So that's what's coming up on my channel, as well as doing a lot more Star Trek episodes, currently covering Season 2 of Next Gen, and many more videos of many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.